It's time for the Double Stop with Brian Sword.
Welcome to the Double Stop podcast. I'm Brian Sword. On this week's show, I'm talking to Jeff Martin, who is the lead singer in Racer X and the drummer in Badlands. Super interesting guy with a lot of great stories, from singing background vocals on Judas Priest Turbo and hanging out with Rob Halford, to the formation of Racer X, to being in Badlands, and all these other bands he's been involved with since. And guess what? He even has a solo album which somehow passed me by. So let's get right to it. Here is my conversation with Jeff Martin.
From Milwaukee, born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, grew up in West Dallas, Wisconsin, which is a suburb of Milwaukee. And my brother was a drummer. I come from a family of, there were 7 of us, Catholic family, of course.
Yeah, I bet.
And everybody listened to music. I mean, I remember from Pat Boone, not to give my age away, but that's no secret. But I remember as a kid, my sister, who more or less kind of raised me, because my mom was over raising kids by then, she was listening to Pat Boone. I remember April Love, Christ. And then of course the Four Seasons and Beatles and Ventures and you name it, I remember more stuff when I was really young than I do now. So I had a brother who was a sax player, another brother who was a drummer, another brother that played guitar and banjo. And then all the sisters and everybody just listened to tons of music. So, I heard the Beatles and I wanted to become a drummer. So there you go.
And what was it about drumming that was the appeal?
All the girls screaming at you.
Yeah, that's a good start.
Cool. That was a good start, but that didn't last long because you had to be reminded that you actually had to look good too to have them screaming at you. But and as far as singing goes, believe it or not, my first real love was Tom Jones. I absolutely loved Jones. Well, yeah, you're getting panties thrown at you, so that's more than just screaming.
I'm starting to get a good idea of your motivation here.
That was the first part of the motivation, and then right now I'm looking up at a poster of the first Jimi Hendrix album, and I remember seeing that on the kitchen table from a brother who came home from college. And of course, before that, it was all Beatles and Cream. I really liked Cream too when I was really young. But then I saw and heard the Jimi Hendrix Experience in the first album, and that was it. Then I wanted not just to be a drummer, I wanted to be a good drummer. So that's what spurred me on to, getting into Mitch Mitchell from that, and of course Ginger Baker and Ian Pace from Deep Purple, and of course John Bonham. When I heard that was an epiphany. So,
did your brother start showing you stuff, or did you have to kind of do it on your own?
I did it on my own. Yeah, there was just a drum set kind of hanging around, and he was always off doing other stuff. He went into the Navy in the '60s, and I think that drum set disappeared at that same time. But what had happened is all his old cymbals and all just cymbals in general. We had a really big old house in Wisconsin. So it had a gigantic attic, and there was stuff that was stowed away in that attic. And I used to go just rummaging through there, and I'd find little splash cymbals, and I'd just nail them to, I'd make my own cymbal stands with a broomstick, and I'd nail these cymbals onto that. And my first snare drum was actually a TV tray with pennies and a chain and a towel over the top. And that's what I first learned on, was a TV tray and a splash cymbal on a broomstick.
Now, learning that way, were the principles still the same? Like, was it helpful, or was it really just messing around until you got a proper set of drums?
It was helpful because I moved from that. And as soon as, my mom heard this crashing of this metal, and of course, we're talking about 60s here, it was such an ungodly sound that my mom went to Sears, got me my first snare drum, which was I think it was it was a Sears and Roebuck red snare drum. But what had happened when I got that snare drum, she rented me a hi-hat. So I had a snare drum and a hi-hat. And then I got a garbage can. And I remember learning Tales of Brave Ulysses from Cream off the Disraeli Gears album. And of course, I didn't have a bass drum, so my right hand was the bass drum. So it was, boom, ka, boom, boom, ka, boom. So it taught patterns by doing it with my hands first. And then when I got to a bass drum, I already knew the pattern and just had to get the dexterity to do it. So, and that next Christmas is when I got my first drum set, and it was a white. My grandma had passed away. My mom had some money. As having 7 kids, we didn't have a lot of money, so my grandma passed away, and my mom used some of that money. And the smallest box under the Christmas tree was a picture of a drum set, and it was a red Whitehall.
And how old would you have been at that point?
I must have been 7 or 8 years old, somewhere in that.
You were young. You were really into it early then.
Yeah, I was. But, self-taught. And then, she decided right across the street from my Catholic school, which was St. Rita's, was a music store. What the heck was it called? I can't remember, but, I'd always press my nose against the glass in there. But she sent me to have lessons. And, of course, me being, and of course, back then, they didn't have anything like Ritalin or any of that stuff, but I learned from having my own kid, because we never put her on Ritalin, but she's totally ADHD, and turns out I am too. So I needed some drugs to settle me down, because I went for lessons, and I went to about 2 of them, and it wasn't moving fast enough, and I just said, screw this. So I just became self-taught from there. Just, headphones, a record player, or my brother's 8-track player. So the 8-track was good because you couldn't learn just one song, because if you were learning one song, you had to listen to the other 3 or 4 songs on that track and then go back to the top and get to your song again. So there was no rewinding, fast forward, rewinding, none of that. You had your one shot to hear what the hell he was doing, and you hoped you got it,
So you had to learn by batches.
Yeah.
How long until you're in your first band?
My cousin, who was, we were almost like brothers. He had gotten a guitar, and I can't say that, I don't even know if it had a name. I think we did. And it was not too soon after that, and Born on the Bayou by Creedence Clearwater was the first song I learned and played in a band. Actually, before that, when I had the TV tray and the little cymbal, I had a band, and I don't know what it was called, but we only had 2 songs. I can't remember the second one, but the first one was Boys by the Beatles. And it was 2 of my little buddies, and we'd set up a stage in the backyard with sheets on my mom's outside clotheslines, and we'd charge like 2 cents a head, and we'd make we'd make 8 cents at the gig, And I would sing Boys while crashing away on all my TV trays and cymbals, and there were no strings on the guitar, and it was me singing. So imagine what that sounded like. I'd give $1 million if I had it just to have a recording of that, a visual. Yeah. It must have been the most hilarious thing anybody's ever seen.
So you started singing also back at that early age as well, then?
Yeah, I always wanted to be a singing drummer. And especially after seeing Don Brewer, that was it for me, and that was an epiphany too. Actually, the year that I'd gotten my drum set, which happened to be a red drum set, just like Don Brewer, I bought my sister, not even knowing who these guys were. It was Grand Funk Railroad, or so somewhere along. It could have been after that too. Obviously you could look up the dates and timelines on these things. But after seeing Don Brewer and hearing him sing, and his drive behind the drums, technically he wasn't the greatest drummer in the world, but he had his own style, and he had his triplets, and the way he sang and the way he did harmonies and stuff just blew me away, and that's what I wanted to be. And that really got me going as wanting to be a singing drummer and not just a drummer.
Now, in terms of bands, was it high school then until your first, I don't want to say real band, but when you really started a serious band?
I I was in the end of grade school, I think, and
Yeah.
I was with a band, and so this is so long ago, it's really hard to remember, but I just remember everybody having custom and plush amplifiers, which were really cool. And this was the first band that actually had amplifiers, and they were really big and loud and stuff. And this was still in Wisconsin because later on, when my dad retired, he moved me because I was the baby of the family. I had to go with them because I was still in high school when they retired, and they moved me to Phoenix, Arizona. And but back then, I don't think that I actually played a paying outdoor gig until like I was a freshman in high school. And at that time, I was playing in a band, and all the guys were 20 and 21 years old. I had, I was a pretty good drum. Everybody used to come just to see me just because I had that Don Brewer type drive. I just hit the drums as hard as I could, and I dug in hard, and I was into Mitch Mitchell, trying to do fast snare drum licks, even if I couldn't pull them off yet. But it was my drive that I think people really dug. But needless to say, it was in Palmyra, and we were playing just some high school dance, and that was my first gig. And I actually could probably I just found a picture of that gig, and I think it was 1972 or something that gig was 69 or set. No, it had to be set. I'll have to look. My timeline stuff is terrible, but yeah, that was my first gig, and I think the band was called Antares, and we did Rock and Roll by Zeppelin. We did Smoke on the Water. We did tons of Deep Purple, all the stuff that I love. So it was a perfect band for me. And then later on with that same band, I started touring all over. And I don't even know how my parents let me do this because I was only 13 or something like that. And I was with 13 or 14, and I was with guys that were, 20 and 21. And we were traveling all over upstate Wisconsin, into Michigan, Minnesota, playing these gigs. And I was this goofy little kid, just banging away.
I bet you learned a lot on those tours.
Oh, I did. I saw too much. I saw too much and learned too much. Yeah, yeah. I got my nut busted early. So I had to
I
keep up with
bet.
all the boys. It
Yeah.
was funny because I remember we were playing in this place called Merrill, Wisconsin, and we were too loud for the place was called the Fin and Feather, and it was one of these steakhouses way up in Wisconsin where they're probably doing something illegal like moonshining or whatever in their backyards, and everybody with long hair was a hippie, and so they kicked us out of the Fin and Feather because our music didn't fit and we were too loud. So we decided to ask some of the locals where we could set up and just play. So they said, "Well, we got this big band shell," and it was a big concrete band shell in this beautiful park way up in northern Wisconsin. So it was all green and beautiful. And we did a free concert, and the whole freaking town showed up. All these people. So it was a big party. We got invited to stay at these people's houses, and yeah, that's the night of my cherry popping, and it was one of the little sisters of one of the older 21-year-olds that was busting a nut with one of the band, and she was around my age, 13 or 14. That was great. So it was an experience for both of us. We
I
were just
bet.
watching what everybody else was doing, and then we do it. Just smaller sizes.
Yeah. So you're barely a teenager. You're touring around with a bunch of older kids, and
Yeah,
then your dad moves you to the
yeah,
other end of the country.
yeah. Moved me all the way to Phoenix, Arizona.
How
And
traumatic was that?
That was traumatic. I was gonna go back. I was ready to move back, and at that time I'd gotten another new drum set, and it was a brand new one, and it was a Ludwig, and it was the black leather. I think they called it pleather or something, but I remember I had my first real Ludwig kit, and that came with us and was stuck in storage in Phoenix forever because we didn't have we were staying at my sister's, and we didn't really find our house for a couple months. So I had to start at one high school, and I found out that I think I was a junior at that time, and they told me, they brought me in, they called me from my class, just a week or so after I'd started at this high school in Phoenix, Arizona. And by no means am I an academic genius. I mean, I was dreaming the whole time. My hair was dyed orange. It was all stuck up like David Bowie. And, I was just dreaming of where I was going to be playing next on stage. I had nothing to do with reading, writing, or arithmetic. Just watch me spell if you want to know. But uh, they call me into the office and they go, "Well, Mr. Martin, it seems as though you have so many credits that you can graduate at the end, right before the last semester of this year." And I'm a junior. I'm going, fuck yeah. Because I hate school anyway. I always had. And so I'm just like that. That part of it was fantastic. And, I hadn't hooked up with any musicians yet. The people I was hanging out with was my sister's husband's brother, and he was the center for Camelback High School football team. So, and his job was to make sure I didn't want to move back home and to take me to the Boondockers and to meet all the girls and all this. But I was this crazy looking, spiky haired goofball hanging out with all these jocks, and they were really cool with me. When I look back, I'm going, any one of those guys wanted to just kill me, but they never acted like it. And so I had like 2 or 3 months of that. And, going to school, hanging out with jocks, really trying to find somebody who had a joint, and would party long-hairingly wise and rock wise. And there wasn't a lot at that school, to tell you the truth. I didn't really meet anybody. But then my dad found a house which was, maybe 7 or 8 miles away, 9 miles away from that high school. So I had to change high schools in the middle of that year.
Oh.
And I changed to Moon Valley High School. And that's where I ended up meeting the greatest people. All my best friends still are from Moon Valley. I met Greg Chason not soon after, with other musicians through that. But I got called into the office there, and they go, "Well, Mr. Martin, seems as though you don't have enough credits, and you may have to go another year to high school." So just because of the way the school system was set up in Arizona, in one district you had more than enough, in another I didn't have enough. So, oh man, my last senior year I had to take government and math and all these crazy fucking classes I couldn't stand, and it was nightmarish. But at the same time, meeting really cool people, finding people with bags of weed who wanted to share it with me, and that sort of same stuff that goes on in the '70s. So, my whole thing at Moon Valley High School and the '70s was pretty much like that '70s show, except with musicians and without really great looking chicks. There was no Donnas in my life. There was a couple, but not quite as good as that. But anyway, that was it. And then of course, my best friend that I hooked up with, he was a drummer too. He was in a band called Starfog, and I started jamming with a guitar player, Patterson, I think was his last name. And he says, "Oh, hey, I know this great bass player, and I'm going to call him over." And here comes Greg up the road, walking with platform shoes on, big wedge of hair, and and the tough guy he's always been. And that's the first time I jammed with Greg Chason right in back of my high school. And then from there, Greg said, "Oh, I got this other really great guitar player, Jim McMillan." And that's where the band Ghost Rose started. And that's my really first band in Arizona with Jim McMillan, Greg Chason. And we did Captain Beyond and old Deep Purple, like, what am I trying? Well, anyway, old cool Deep Purple and Scorpions. We were the first one anywhere in Arizona to play Scorpions, and I'm talking about stuff from Lonesome Crow and when In Trance came out, that was an epiphany for all of us because we were playing all that stuff. We were playing Catch Your Train and all these crazy songs. But unfortunately, nobody could really sing it. Not even me then. I was still shouting at the top of my lungs and didn't have any idea what I was really doing vocally yet. And but I learned on my motorcycle because I've always had motorcycles from the time I was 16. Before I had cars, I had motorcycles, and I learned how to sing on my bike with the wind blowing into my face without a helmet on.
How does that work? Learning how to sing on a motorcycle. What was it with the motorcycle?
Well, the cool thing is you got all that back pressure, the wind blowing in your face, and you're singing as hard as you can at the wind at
Yeah.
60. Let's face it, I learned how to sing at 60 miles an hour most of the time. So you just had to. That's where I got my all my power, I guess, is from doing that. I other singers who used to sing into 2 liter Coke bottles and stuff like that, like the first singer from Maiden. That was his story. Mine is I was against the wind, literally.
Is that the band with Greg where you guys played uh, like the big field parties?
We did have big kegger. We call them keggers or
Keggers,
boondockers.
yeah.
Yeah, and we'd get a flatbed truck, and that was a stage. And we'd set up on the flatbed truck, and then the kegs, someone would do the keg thing, and someone would bring the generator, and we'd go way out in the desert, and we'd have these huge shows, and everybody would freaking show up, and it'd just be a complete blowout. But a lot of times we actually played at people's houses. They'd say, "Oh, my parents are gone," so the entire house would just get raped, and we'd be in there, playing Cactus and all these crazy songs that a lot of these kids don't even know because they were halfway obscure. And actually, Greg and Jim were really into ZZ Top and really good at it, and Point Blank and a lot of the more offline Southern rock out bands that were really cool. And so we did a lot of that stuff too. And we did a little Rush, I mean, everything. But of course, we all had to try to figure out how to sing it. So later on, when we finally found some singers to actually try to sing this stuff, our name changed to a band. It was called Saint Michael. And that was mainly because we did so much UFO. And that's probably the reason I got the UFO gig. I did so much UFO back then because our guitar player was a total shanker freak. Played the Flying V, had the wah wah, stepped down, so it had that tone. And we did just about every old UFO song you can imagine. And that was mainly the end of Ghost Rose into St. Michael's when we really did a lot of UFO and stuff. And that was still me just drumming at that point.
Okay, so you're still drumming and doing background vocals, I guess?
Yeah, yeah. And some songs I'd try to blurt out a lead here and there. I think I did In Trance. I did Burn the Sky. Those songs. Can't remember them all, but I had some songs. I think we tried to do some Rainbow songs later on, but he's still out of my grasp. I mean, that guy is just, I have a different kind of voice than a Dio voice, and he is the greatest lead vocalist that's ever been in metal. There's no doubt about it.
And I heard that guy never even warmed up before shows.
He didn't have to. Well, he was what, and this is nothing against how tall he was or his size or his makeup, but the timbre of his voice, he was just a smaller guy. So, I mean, if I tried to hit some of the notes that he hit and they just sound like this huge, big, full voice, I sound like Rob Halford doing it just because that's the timbre of my voice. It just wouldn't. It doesn't transpose, and he was just a freak. He was just the most amazing. And you know what? I did a 3 month tour with him too. I was in a band called Black Symphony, and we went all over Germany, all over Europe together for almost 3 months. And there's not a cooler human being on this planet. And I tell you what, he may be little, he may be fierce. He had the balls of a fucking gorilla, and he just carried himself so well. I could see why Napoleon almost took over the world like he did. but he did it. He was a really loving, cool guy. That was a really great time in my life to meet him. But me hanging out with Halford all those years too. We were best friends in Arizona.
I was going to ask you about that, about walking into your friend's house, and there sits Rob Halford.
Yeah, Greg's a great guy, been a great friend. You'll never hear funnier stories told hanging around him. He's just a complete hoot. But he's a tough character. His dad's nickname was The Rock, and I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And he had a lot of brothers, and so he had to fight his way through a lot of stuff. So he's a tough character, and sometimes that didn't bode well with bands or whatever. And I think at one point he had gotten voted out of St. Michael just through him doing whatever, pissed somebody off. I'm not sure. And everybody's got a vote sort of thing. And so he was out of St. Michael towards the end, and after St. Michael was done, St. Michael kind of turned into a bar band and had a different bass player, and we were really doing 4 sets of Southern rock and UFO and all that kind of stuff. And after that went down, I went into a really goofy bar band that actually I had a really bad accident. I got married. I think I was 21 years old or so. Got married, and I was climbing up this mountain called Squaw Peak, and I was coming back down the trail. We used to kind of like skip run down this trail. I come around the corner, and here's this little kid in the middle of the trail, so I tried to take a right around him. I went over an abutment and fell, maybe 20 feet, and I landed straight on my face on these jagged rocks. And actually, believe it or not, I used to look like Brad Pitt, but that really screwed me up. But it changed my life for a long time. I really raped my face bad. I had 85 stitches, a lot of plastic surgery. I remember coming down to the bottom, and I had to do a gig that night, and looking in the window, a tinted window of I think it was a big old Cadillac or something, and the whole right side of my face was just gaping open. My eyeball was just hanging. You could see the bottom of my eyeball. My lip it was nightmarish. And I just said, "Oh fuck, I'll never look the same now. You're fucked." So anyway, after that, I was in this band that I was just about to go up to Idaho and all these places, but we had a chick singer, and we were doing Journey and all this crap that I hated. And the only reason they got me in the band is because they wanted a singing drummer that could do the heavier stuff, because I was doing Judas Priest and all that kind of stuff. And it just turned into a nightmarish kind of a band called Elektra. And the people in it were great. It was a guitar player from St. Michael, and everybody was cool. And actually, it was a good band. Everybody played well, but it just wasn't my style of music. It was total bar band music. Total, I'm paying the bills. Just playing these shitty songs I hate. And so I kind of got myself out of that. And Greg contacted me because he's the one him and Jim Keeler started a band called Surgical Steel. And that's right when the whole metal thing was just starting to bite, You had Iron Maiden, and of course you had Priest, and all that stuff was just, turning into leather and spikes and all that kind of stuff. And I was always a good I remember how I got the gig. Greg said, "Dude, you're a great dancer. You'll make a great lead singer." So
Perfect.
It wasn't because I could sing. They just wanted me to swing my ass around on stage, and I had never, ever gotten from behind drums and sang in front of anybody. So anyway, I was working out with that band, and Barney needed songs for a metal album. I think it was Metal Massacre 1 or 2 or whatever, but the song Rivet Head got on there, and that was my first time in the studio. But before I recorded that, I was just working out with the band for like a week, maybe a week and a half. And who does Jim Keeler, the guitar player in our band, meet at this really big club in Phoenix, but Rob Halford? Meets him at this bar and says, "Hey, we're lining up a gig in 3 days, and we got this new singer, and we're going to do this thing." So we did this gig at a place called PC Manufacturing. He ended up becoming part of a band that I played in for a while, too. His name was Danny Poole, a really great guy, entrepreneur sort of guy. And they made those things that put paper and tape out together when you're masking off walls, to paint. And
Oh,
they
sure,
sold
yeah.
that to 3M for multi-millions of dollars. But I used to make those things and cut the paper for them. But we played at the factory in the backyard, and they made all the stage out of the giant paper rolls that, you cut these little paper rolls from. And who's out in the audience? And this is my first gig. I mean, my first gig as a singer. Who's out in the audience but Rob Halford, my number one singing idol of all time. So I was shitting bricks and doing metal and not dressed all that great. I had some leather on, trying to figure out exactly what I'm doing. Everybody's got this is the very beginnings of everybody sticking a ton of Aquanet in your hair and making your hair stick out. So, I mean, this was the cuff of the whole thing. And so we just we were kind of like I don't know. Our originals were kind of like Judas Priest, except I sang about chicks a lot. Um, that was about it. But we became unbelievably great friends, and then for years after that, we ended up getting a movie called Thunder Alley that we were in. We did that Rivet Head thing, and unfortunately, Greg got voted out of that band too, and I almost got my ass kicked for that one. But it went on, and we tried to get signed. Even Rob Halford tried to get us signed to Columbia through this. I can't even remember this guy's name, and I probably because I want to forget it because he passed on. So he's the reason I've eaten 10 million thousand dime burritos and bags of top ramen because he's passed on three major bands that could have really done great. Surgical Steel was one of them. Racer X was another. And then after we got dropped from Atlantic, he saw us play, and we were playing great with Badlands. And guy's a real dick. But I mean, he signed Warrant. Warrant opened up for Racer X in at the Country Club, and he came out to see us. And I mean, people were scalping tickets for $100 just to see us play, and he signs Warrant instead of us. Guy's a real. Thank God I can't remember his name. But anyway. That was the beginning. My first time singing at PC was the beginning of me actually getting out behind the drums for almost a decade and just singing metal and doing that whole thing. And then later on, of course, from the whole Surgical Steel thing, that's when I got connected with Paul Gilbert, and he started sending me some tapes. And I wrote the first song I wrote was the last song we recorded on our very last studio album, so it's kind of weird. But
Weird, yeah.
Yeah, it was first called "Don't Change a Thing," but it always needed to be changed, and it never got recorded. But anyway, Mike Varney had a lot to do with all that, getting that all together.
And how did Racer X come together?
Well, through Mike Varney. Mike Varney saw Paul Gilbert at, I think, one of those. Of course, Paul was sending tapes, and Varney was coming up through all of the albums that he did, and like the Metal Massacre albums and the Guitar Hero albums, things that he was doing. Talk about Guitar Hero. He was definitely the first guy to do all that stuff. But yeah, Mike Varney put me in touch with so many great people. I mean, I can't say I definitely haven't bought a house or made $1 billion off of it, or enough to make a really decent living. But I've gotten to go on a lot of tours. I've got to do a lot of great albums. I played with Lynch. I played with Kevin DuBrow. I toured with UFO and almost did an album. Met Michael Schenker and did 3 albums with him because of Mike Varney. So all in all, he's just put me. And Paul Gilbert was, my best friend in the world for ages. But the music business makes you crawl off into different directions for unforeseen reasons. And we always wanted to. I always want to do another Racer X album, and just he doesn't seem to be too interested in doing that. He cites his bad hearing for it, but I don't know.
Yeah, it seems like you had 2 kind of bursts with Racer X.
Yeah,
and then where you did a lot very quickly, and then it goes quiet for a while.
Yeah. And it was great, well, and we were riding off the cuff of how big Mr. Big was in Japan. So that was all done, and we definitely got to ride on the wave of the whole Mr. Big thing because they were like the Beatles over there
Oh
practically. I
yeah.
mean, they were Budokan out 4 nights in a row and stuff, or whatever the hell it was, but it was just ridiculous. So we got on Universal, which was Paul's label over there, and they put in a lot of money in us, and we got to do all those albums again. Best of them all being Superheroes, I think. And at that time, Bruce Bouillet couldn't play guitar because he had such bad carpal tunnel. His hands were completely wasted. So he got surgery, and he had to talk about a story. There's a guy you need to talk to. He had to come back from the brink of relearning how to teach himself how to play guitar completely differently, and now he's just wielding it again. Which brings up the fact that him and I, 2 NAMM shows ago, he brought me a CD of 35 song ideas. Him and I took those, I edited them, made them into songs, put vocals on them, wrote the vocals, went into a little studio. We did 25 of them. We got 25 Racer X songs right now. And I was going to send, my evil plan was to send Paul a song a day for a month until he cracked.
That's a brilliant idea.
Well, I ended up sending him five, and then five, and then five. And immediately his comeback was, well, I'm not really doing metal right now. I'm doing jazz and blues, and my hearing is so bad, and, blah, blah, blah. And there's some really great songs in there. It was a good beginning. Even if it wasn't the whole album, there was definitely a good beginning to get things kickstarted. And of course, Travis wants to go now. I mean, he's ready to go do Racer X stuff right now. And so am I, of course. I mean, it's like it's hard for me to start another metal band and then call it some other name, and it's just so hard. It's just like when Tina Turner got divorced from Ike, all she wanted was her name because the name is everything. A lot of people know Sir X. We'll sell a bunch of copies, and we could do House of Blues tours, no problem, once a year, eight shows or something, just to keep the thing going, and it just doesn't seem to happen, and it's really, really frustrating for me because I know that's a good avenue not only for me to really do my craft, but to make a little dough in the meantime, and I really lost my ass on my solo album, so I'm constantly digging out from spending a ton of money making my own album and the whole thing being downloaded by everybody. And it got good write-ups. It has Michael Schenker on it. It has Paul Gilbert on it. And that was my evil plan with that was, well, Paul doesn't want to do Racer X, but the closest thing to Racer X is him and I writing together, so that was my solo album. And him being the guitar player. But I have Russ Parrish from Steel Panther is the other guitar player. Rev Jones from MSG is a bass player. And then I found 3 string players, oddly enough, at my sister's daughter's, my niece's wedding. She had some friends who played violin and cello, and they played at her wedding, and I had an epiphany there. I heard them do this counterpoint playing on Stairway to Heaven, and I go, I wonder what that would sound like, run through a Marshall with a tube screamer to my songs. And I'd make up separate melody. Not to sound like Spinal Tap, but it's fine lines intertwining. I can't come up with a very hard riff on my own, but a lot of simpler riffs all mixed together and layered is kind of what my writing is on that. And that's what I did. It came out, in my opinion, really cool. But I lost my ass, and I spent thousands and thousands, all my savings, did a bunch of credit card stuff, and I just got shit on completely. I had Mascot Records picked it up for Europe, but my main concern was selling it in Japan. And Paul was changing labels right at that time, and he was on my album, and he was going to WHD, and they kind of blackballed me because they didn't want him to go off onto any other label, and they didn't sign my album because I think his album was coming out at the same time. Just terrible timing, terrible luck at the whole thing. So Mainly, I just been doing every butthole goofy job to pay the bills for my old album.
And that's an album from 2006.
That's from 2006, and I'm still paying on it. I'm just barely
Oh,
paying the interest. And that's another reason for me wishing I could get Racer X back together, because we made some pretty good money. And obviously, I know it's a brand new, brave new world. I'm trying to make any kind of dough doing records right now, but we could definitely get out there, tour especially the House of Blues type places, and sell some T-shirts. We're just T-shirt salesmen anymore, really, and really people. Paul Gilbert fans in particular really like to see him play guitar in the metal, and as much as great as he sounds on all his other stuff. And believe me, I was his drummer on his first solo projects, and that was a blast doing that stuff. And as great as that stuff is, his guitar playing is just really caters great to Racer X style play songs.
that's when his career kind of got back on track. Like, I actually really like the solo records too, of the ones in the late 90s.
Oh
But they were
yeah.
doing the pop songs, lyrics about girls kind of thing. But as soon as he did the Racer X and did the guitar shred stuff, it took off again.
He took off again, and that can happen again, and I wish it would. And like I said, me and Scott talked about, well, we could call it X Racer X and get another guitar player. Go, it's all about Paul is such a focal point of that band, and mainly his writing too, not just his amazing guitar playing. I mean, I'm being approached right now to do, and I'm probably going to do a record. Would really like to anyway, because he's a great guy. Uh, his name's Jackie Vincent. He's from Falling in Reverse, and of course he's a huge. When he met me, he's almost started crying because he cut his teeth so sharply on Gilbert stuff, and and that band is doing so well. And then also from Chelsea Grin, the guitar player from Chelsea Grin, and those two guys have been on tour for years now on these huge tours, and they've just been practicing together and doing all this Paganini stuff. And if I come out with those guys, it's going to be the scariest straight on shred album anybody has ever heard. And my voice is in really great shape for the high kind of painkiller superhero kind of voice. I've really honed that thing, and I could do that all night long and do the screechy high voice through all this stuff. And so it's just going to be a screaming Mimi of an album if we get this thing done together. And but that being said, even with these guys who are on the cover of Guitar Player magazine now as being the new great shit, it's so hard to make anything like that jump. It's so easy to make something work with Racer X, mainly because of the name and our catalog of all these great
Of course.
albums. And we're kind of like the Godfathers, or at least we're in the big black pot of the Godfathers of shred.
Yeah, it's definitely first wave.
Yeah.
Right
So
from the beginning.
yeah, and that's what I get. When I'm walking down the aisles of the NAMM show, I'm getting guys from Avenged Sevenfold who want a picture with me. And I relayed that to Paul, saying, this is kind of a good time for us to do this. We're like the muddy waters of shred, and we need to go out there and do another album.
Show the kids how it's done.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it too, because even me, when I took away what I took away with trying to learn how to play like John Bonham or Mitch Mitchell or any of these great drummers, it was diluted for sure. Whenever, and God bless them, they're all doing the shred thing, and they're coming up with new and unbelievable ways of doing it. I kind of liken drumming now. You listen to Glenn Sobel and some of these guys. It's like when I was jumping my dirt bike over this little stream, we made a ramp, and I jump over the thing, and woo, man, was that great. Now they're jumping over it, doing two flips, grabbing onto the back of the seat, hanging off, on fire. And that's kind of like how these players are now too. They're doing shit that I could never imagine anybody doing. But the depth of where we came from, our character, and the depth of how we feel about music and how we convey that is the difference between that kind of showboat, unbelievable playing, and where we came from and what we're trying to do, or what we may have. That's all I can say. That if I have anything, I may have some kind of feel or something that's just a little extra than playing the fastest double bass drum licks, in this thing while twirling sticks and doing all that stuff, which is unbelievable. I'm not taking away from that, but you know, give me a little piece of gristle off that steak, for saying I have something to give the public musically.
How frustrating is it then to be tied into, and that's not uncommon, a musical partner, to be so closely associated with one musical partner?
Well, it's frustrating when they don't want to work with you. Like I told some of my friends, and this may seem really awful to some people, especially if they are Warrant fans. But of course, I have shit stuck in my craw about Warrant because they got signed and we didn't at our own show. But I knew the singer from Warrant and stuff, and his problems. I did a tour with him where he walked off the tour after I learned all his songs and all that stuff. But I was telling people, shit, I'd rather be in Warrant right now because one, I'd either be dead and wouldn't have to put up with not being able to go out and play my music, or I'd have a band that actually wants to play with me and I could go out and play. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And we have such a good time together that it's super frustrating for me. It really is. And as you know, I am actually right now recording with a whole bunch of people vocally, with the Stu Marshall of Death Dealer. I've got 6 songs that I wrote for him, and I'm in the studio doing that. I'm doing one with Sean Baker, which is the string skipper. He's got a shred album he's doing. So I'm finally getting out there, but I have never sang on anybody else's album because I always saw myself as a singer for Racer X, and trying to do anybody else's stuff just didn't seem right to me. So now I'm getting unstupid and trying to sing with some other people and do it, because it really seems like it's never going to happen. And I'm kind of like Linus at the pumpkin patch, waiting for the great pumpkin to show up.
Now let's talk a little bit about Badlands. What are your memories of looking back at that band?
Well, obviously Greg once again gets me into another gig, and which was fantastic. But he got me in the front door, obviously, with a guy like Jakey Lee, who is very strong-minded and strong-willed. You're not going to talk him into anything unless he wants to do it and likes what you're doing. And I had to work for that gig. But here I heard I might be up for the to audition for it. So I figure out the whole first album note for note, which, by the way, I learned a lot from listening to Eric Singer's beats. I've got a different way of doing runs, but he's really great in putting beats together for songs, and that really taught me how to build a song beat wise and stuff. And so I learned that whole album. I get there, and at that time I had so much spare time. I was like in the kitchen, always baking something. So I came for 5 audition rehearsals at Mate's Rehearsal, and first night was an apple pie. Second night was something else. I was making brownies with stuff in it, not pot or anything. And of course, this whole time I didn't once play any Badlands songs. It was all new material. It was everything from Voodoo Highway, and they were just seeing what I do with it and put on it. So those 5 days was nothing but brand new songs and at the time Ray wasn't even there. Ray was back in New York doing something, maybe just visiting. I don't know. I didn't know him well enough. But I remember on the 5th night, he walks in with his charismatic grin and his dingy, dirty, white, long leather jacket. And we're working on the song, and we just finished this one song. I'm not even sure what it was. Could have been Soul Stealer or something. And he sits down on a stool, grabs a mic, and just starts singing the holy fuck out of it. And he's never heard the song. And I didn't know about his thing, about Jibba Jab. And I mean, he had words and everything. As far as I'm concerned, he had words and everything. But they weren't words. They were a thing he called Jibba Jab. He puts a word on the beginning of the sentence, one at the end, and the whole middle is just vowels. Pretty much the Dusk album. And the stuff he would come up with immediately upon hearing a song, he'd have a hard time finding words to fit because his jibba jab was so rhythmically cool and sonically cool that it would be a hard time for him to find lyrics that would work. And which was the problem in Dusk, and why that whole thing fell apart before that went to a major label. But so that was my first meeting there of that whole thing. And then of course when you walked in, they did the vote, and I got in there. And then the next 3 months we just worked on putting together Voodoo Highway. And then I saw a drum set. I still didn't have a real drum set. I was playing with Paul Gilbert and Russ Parrish, and we had a band called the Electric Fence, and we were just playing at MI, doing shows. Paul got sick of doing guitar seminars, so he said, "Hey, let's just learn a whole bunch of old cool music like I used to play when I was a kid." And so we had this whole shtick of how we all talked English, and these are our own songs, and we've had a lot of plagiarism in our life. We had like 127 of all the best old Bowie and Sabbath, and you name it, all the Deep Purple, all that stuff. And we all dressed up in this goofy old Panther material stuff, and we just made this it was kind of like the beginnings of it was a Spinal Tap band, and it's kind of the beginnings of Russ getting into making fun of music and the whole Booty Quake and Steel Panther thing, to tell you the truth. But that's what got me into playing drums again. And right after that is when the whole Badlands thing came together. So I had been playing drums again after almost a whole decade of having it off. And of course we're playing for students, so you don't want to suck. But
Yeah.
rule of thumb was we'd make up the tape of all the songs we'd pick. Everybody got a tape. We'd rehearse them, and only one rehearsal before the show. So everybody had to do their homework. So it was really cool. And it kept it spontaneous too, and kind of exciting, because you're not that polished, And you can see these online. Just look up Electric Fence at MI, and there's 5 shows we did, and each one has got a kind of a different genre. And one was, completely a Sabbath one, where we were doing nothing but really heavy Sabbath, and we were tuned almost to B, I think, or something. It was pretty incredible, and everybody sings. But that really got me back into doing the Badlands thing and playing. And of course, Badlands is kind of retro, sort of vibey blues rock. Bad Company meets Humble Pie and Zeppelin, and actually their own thing. Badlands definitely had its own sound too. But boy, that wasn't an easy band to be in, with all the stuff going on with Ray, and then the management, and then the label, the business part of that whole thing. The only thing that was really actually amazing with that band is when we all stepped on stage and played. And I have some drum techs now who are my best friends, and they say to this day they've never seen anybody on stage that played that well together. Because we had 3 songs that we went off on, and they could be 7 minutes long or they could be 27 minutes long, depending on how everybody felt. And we just went off, and it was great. It was like the old days of the song remains the same, by Zeppelin, and long jams and cool stuff.
That's very similar to what Greg said, was that whatever conflict or whatever you guys had to deal with before the show, as soon as the show happened, then it was a whole new ball game.
Yeah. Ray always liked to cause conflict, because he said we played better. And for as cool as the guy he was, he knew how to push some buttons, but in a fun kind of way, in a cool way. And of course, Jake never liked to go along with the late. He'd have the president of Atlantic calling him, and he wouldn't answer his phone. He just didn't cater to any of that bullshit from the bigwigs of the label. It was all about the art and all that kind of stuff. And
tell me about Dusk, because I understand that you were the one who knew where the tapes were.
No, I didn't know where the tapes were. Actually, I got a call from, well, we did that whole thing. Shea Baby was a friend of Ray's, and we had already worked up all the songs for the third album. And of course, we said, Jake said, well, I want to be heavier on this one, darker and heavier. And that's kind of what it was. I mean, what you're hearing there is one take of every song, all of us playing at the same time, including vocals. There's absolutely no overdubs in that thing anywhere. And I think in Sun Red Sun, Greg sang the background vocals on it, and that's it. It's the only thing I can hear. And if anybody, I mean, I can hear a couple mistakes on my part. There's a labored end that had to be kind of, trilled off a little bit, and I didn't quite hit that. But Jake didn't make one goddamn mistake in any of that stuff. And I mean, all those effects, everything was his pedal board. The beginning of, I forget what, Tribal Moon, I think, is Ray. You hear those chimes in the beginning? Yeah. He used to wear like 20 silver bracelets on his arm. And I remember him smiling at me through the glass. And while Jake was playing the intro, he was dinging his finger back and forth on his bracelet and just kind of smiling at me going, doesn't this sound cool? And awesome. It's just so if you wanted to be in a room with Badlands, that's what it sounded like. So the end result and Jake was a master at, you listen to Fire and Rain, and man, when I heard that song and all the production he did with the pianos and the organ and all the background stuff, a lot of those songs on Dusk would have been that, but that is just, the scaled down version of us doing the demo for Atlantic. And of course, Jason Flom passed immediately and then dropped us. We did that, and then we were in Texas not too long after, and we got the road out in the middle of the desert. It was perfect for a Badlands thing. We're out in the road at some crummy little truck stop, and we hear, you just got dropped from Atlantic. And that was another time I heard, well, it's a brave new world. There was a lot of those in that band. And, we just continued on the rest of that tour and then tried to get signed. And of course, there's a long falling out with none of those lyrics. The argument that when Ray walked out on our last rehearsal was that the label didn't have lyrics to these songs yet, and that they were pissed off. And then, Jake and Greg were pissed off that he's not getting his lyrics done, and it comes back to his jibba-jabbing, and so that's when Ray walked out of the rooms and fuck you guys, and I got on my motorcycle, I think the next day or whatever, and I'm driving home. I'm thinking the band's done. It's over. So, and I get halfway, and I find out the highway patrol's looking for me. My girlfriend, now wife, calls me and goes, you got to turn around and go back to LA. You got a tour and you're going to England. I'm going to England with a guy who just quit and his girlfriend. And that was a huge Spinal Tap tour. And then, boy, that's such a long story. I'd need to have another call back with you on that one, because Rob Reiner would love these stories. I mean, I think that week that Ray quit, Jake had a interview with Kerrang! Magazine and said a lot of unflattering things about Ray. Well, he's a good singer and everything, but there's no way he's going to be filling David Lee Roth's moves or anything like that. Something cognizant to him not being a great stage person. Well, of course, that magazine comes out the first day we're in London, and I hear this almighty screaming coming from the backstage area, motherfucker, in his New Jersey accent. Did you hear what Jake said about me? And we're just about to go on stage. So the whole month that we're in Europe or in England, I'm the go-between, and they're not talking to Jake. Is not talking to Ray, and Ray is not talking to Jake, and they got to talk to me to talk to them. In this tiny little bus.
Oh boy!
In this tiny little blue bus that we're in. And of course, Ray said, "Well, I'm not coming unless I can bring my girlfriend." So his girlfriend's along. So there you go with the doubly girl. It was so Spinal Tap. It's just not fun. But you know what? That's the best this band has ever played because Ray had something to prove, and he was just a demon. His vocals, you can even hear, he's grittier. He's just really pushing. He's not saving anything. And I know that there's a recording either by the BBC or somebody of the first and last show, and they were both in London. First show was in London, and then we ended up at the last show in London. And of course, Ray got to do an interview with Kerrang, and that magazine came out on our last show. So Jake, being sneakier than Ray, found out exactly what he said. And he says, "Yeah, well, I might not be the greatest front man. I might not be a David Roth, but Jake, I'd like to see Jake try to fill Eddie Van Halen's socks." And the joke there is Ray was always getting stuff backwards. Like he would always say stuff like, "The early worm catches the bird." He would never get old adages right. And instead of saying, well, Eddie Van Halen's shoes, he said his socks. So in the middle of the show, a big manila envelope arrives and Greg brings it out on stage, holding it high above his head, and it says, "This is from Eddie Van Halen." And Jake gets down on the floor, he opens the package, and it's a big pair of socks, and he puts them on, and he starts going into this unbelievable lead. And Ray just fell over laughing. It broke the whole ice, and unfortunately it happened at the last show of the gig, but it was just, that was that whole tour.
That bootleg is on YouTube. I've heard it, and it is brilliant. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah, Ray is just unbelievable.
Now, as you wrap things up, I want to come back to Turbo by Priest, because did you sing backgrounds on that record?
Yeah. I sang private property. I sang all the backgrounds and stuff, and I wrote the second verse and a bridge. And I was at that time that Turbo was going on, me and my first wife, we were in, Rob flew us out for 18 days to Compass Point in the Bahamas, and we were at a really cool English cottage right on the beach with Rob's parents, his sister, and his brother, right, for almost a month, and it was like the greatest time. And Rob was going through a really hard time with a partner of his and with drinking, and he was just he was a mess. And I remember, Jeffy, I can't figure out this one song. I can't write any lyrics to this. So I'm up in his room. My wife's down. I can see her. I can still see it. She's down by the pool, and I write two full verses and a bridge, lyrically. And I remember that evening he comes back. He leaves a note on my door. He goes, "Jeffy, you used half of your lyrics," and then all of a sudden I'm going, "Oh my God, I'm on a Judas Priest album. I can't believe it." And I can't imagine how much it cost him to fly us both out there, to feed it. We didn't pay for anything. That's the kind of guy he was. So I didn't say, well, I need my royalties or that stuff. No, it was a friend helping a friend out, and just for him, somebody who writes lyrics the way he does. I mean, he is a genius. For him to use some of my lyrics, oh man, that was just like. That's one of my prized possessions there, Not that everybody knows it, but yeah. And no, you know what I sang on? I sang on Wild Nights and Hot Crazy Days. That wild nights, that part. And I remember Tom Allum saying, "You sound like a couple chicks in there." You're singing so high. So anyway, that was a really great time in my life. And then not soon after that, because we were kind of drinking buddies. We always liked to polish off a bottle of Jack together. I remember one night he hit the wall, and he threw all his furniture in his pool, and he completely had lost it. And I don't even expect he remembers this, but John Baxter, his manager at the time, was there. And after I just said a prayer, I said an Our Father, and I said, please help me to help my friend. And I did he was sitting on the edge of the bed, and I'm kneeling down on the floor, and he was just a complete wreck, sobbing, and just, I can't do this anymore. I can't, he had had enough with the drink and everything. And I can't even remember what I said to him, but that night he checked himself into Greenway Medical Rehab, and he's been straight ever since. And even the manager came and goes, where did that come from? And I said, I don't know. I don't even know what I said, but it just all came flowing out of me like water. And I just said the right things and saved my friend. So that was another neat thing that, not a lot of people know. And I don't even think Rob knows it because he was so whacked out at that time. And I could have been too. I mean, we were both in the same boat, drinking out of the same bottle, so. I think, my wife kept me pretty straight and narrow, and she had kind of a pretty good Christian background family, so I had to stay on kind of the straight and narrow on the other side of my life. So.
And there we have it. That was Jeff Martin. Make sure you subscribe to the show, either in SoundCloud or on iTunes, and join me again next Monday for another episode of the Double Stop Podcast.
I see the darkness in your eyes. There's no mistake, there's no